Sometimes the smallest objects carry the heaviest truths. Captain Maria Santos stared at the tarnished coin in her palm, its edges worn smooth by countless fingers before hers. Just minutes earlier, her rifle had jammed at the worst possible moment. Enemy fire erupting around her position, her squad looking to her for leadership, and death breathing down their necks. But it wasn't the mechanical failure that shattered her world. It was what she found wedged deep in the rifle's chamber. This single coin, deliberately placed with an inscription that made her blood run cold. The coin bore the date of her birth, and two words that changed everything: we know. 28 years of carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. The identity she'd built, the family she'd never known, the secret that had driven her to excel in every mission. All of it was unraveling because of one jammed rifle and one mysterious coin. Maria thought she'd escaped her past when she enlisted. She believed her real story had died with the orphanage records. But someone knew the truth about who she really was, and they'd been watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. The war around her suddenly seemed less important than the war within her own identity. Because Captain Maria Santos was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about herself was a lie, and the person who'd been hunting her across continents wasn't her enemy. They were family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty outpost as Captain Maria Santos checked her equipment for the third time. Her M4 carbine felt familiar in her hands, the weight of it as natural as breathing after 8 years of military service. The metal was warm from sitting in the Afghan heat, but something felt different today. She couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching her from beyond the perimeter walls. Maria had earned her captain's bars through pure determination and skill. She'd risen through the ranks faster than most, her superiors noting her exceptional tactical thinking and her ability to remain calm under pressure. What they didn't know was that calmness came from years of surviving uncertainty, of never knowing where her next meal would come from or whether the adults around her could be trusted. The orphanage in Detroit had been her first taste of military-like structure. Sister Catherine had run the place like a boot camp, demanding discipline from children who'd been thrown away by the world. Maria learned early that asking questions about her past only brought disappointment. The fire that destroyed the records when she was 7 had been convenient for everyone except her. No birth certificate, no family history, no connection to anything before that gray building on Cass Avenue. She told herself it didn't matter. She'd created her own identity, forged her own path. The Army had given her purpose, structure, and, most importantly, a family of brothers and sisters in arms who never questioned where she came from. They only cared about whether she had their backs, and she always did. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached her position, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Captain, we've got movement 2 click south. Looks like our intel was good about the supply route." His voice carried the tension they all felt before mission. Today's operation was supposed to be routine. Intercept a weapons shipment that intelligence suggested would pass through the valley below their position. Maria nodded, checking her watch. The convoy was expected within the hour. Her team of 12 soldiers was positioned strategically along the ridge, each one handpicked for their skills and reliability. Sergeant Peterson, her communications specialist, was a wizard with technology who could track enemy movements from miles away. Corporal Johnson, barely 22 but already a decorated marksman, could hit a target at distances that seemed impossible. Private Williams, the youngest of her squad, had an intuitive understanding of explosives that kept them all safe from IEDs. These men and women trusted her completely, and she carried that responsibility like a sacred duty. They didn't know about the nightmares that still haunted her sleep, dreams filled with shadowy figures, and conversations in languages she couldn't identify. They didn't know about the way her heart raced whenever she saw certain symbols or heard specific combinations of sounds that seemed familiar but remained frustratingly out of reach. The radio crackled to life in her earpiece. "Falcon 1, this is Overwatch. Target acquired. 3 vehicles approaching from the southwest. ETA, 15 minutes. The voice belonged to Major Harrison, coordinating from the command post 5 miles back. His tone was professional, but Maria detected an unusual edge of urgency that made her more alert. She lifted her binoculars and scanned the valley below. The terrain was perfect for an ambush. Rocky outcroppings provided cover while giving clear lines of sight to the road. She'd studied this area for weeks, memorizing every boulder and crevice. Everything was going according to plan. But as she adjusted her position behind a large rock formation, something caught her eye. A glint of metal that didn't belong, positioned where her advanced scouts had reported no enemy presence. She focused her binoculars on the spot and felt her blood chill. Someone was already there, watching their position through high-powered optics. "Rodriguez," she whispered into her radio, "we've got a problem. Someone's been tracking our movements." Even as she spoke, she was calculating distances, escape routes, and tactical options. The mission had just become a potential trap. Her squad responded instantly to her alert tone, each soldier shifting to defensive positions they'd practiced hundreds of times. But Maria's mind was racing beyond the immediate tactical situation. The positioning of the observer was too perfect, too professional. This wasn't random enemy contact. Someone had known exactly where they would be and when they would be there. The convoy appeared in the distance, right on schedule. 3 military-style vehicles moving at a steady pace along the dusty road. Through her scope, Maria could see armed figures in the vehicles, but something seemed wrong about their formation. The spacing between vehicles, the way they moved, even the route they'd chosen. Everything suggested they knew about the ambush waiting for them. "Falcon 1, you are clear to engage when ready," came Major Harrison's voice through her earpiece. But Maria hesitated. Every instinct she developed through years of combat was screaming that this was wrong. The whole situation felt like an elaborate setup, but she couldn't determine who was setting up whom. She made a decision that would haunt her for years. "Hold positions," she ordered quietly to her team. "Something's not right here." Sergeant Peterson shot her a questioning look from his position 30 meters away, but he followed orders without question. That was the kind of trust she'd built with her soldiers. The convoy continued along the road, apparently unaware of the American forces positioned above them. But as the lead vehicle passed directly below their position, Maria saw something that made her heart stop. One of the passengers looked up directly at her hiding spot and gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was a woman, probably in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that seemed familiar in a way that made Maria's chest tighten. The woman held something in her hand, something small that caught the light for just a moment before disappearing back into the vehicle. "Captain," Rodriguez's voice was urgent in her earpiece. "Overwatch is demanding to know why we haven't engaged. They're saying the intel was solid, and we need to take out that convoy now." Maria felt trapped between competing instincts. Her training demanded she follow orders and complete the mission. But every fiber of her being was telling her that engaging those vehicles would be the biggest mistake of her life. The woman in the convoy hadn't looked like an enemy. She looked like someone trying to communicate something vital. "Tell Overwatch we need 60 seconds to confirm target identification," she radioed back. It was a stall tactic, but it bought her time to think. She focused her scope on the convoy again, studying each vehicle more carefully. The weapons they carried were indeed military grade, but the people holding them didn't move like combatants. They moved like people who were afraid. The second vehicle in the convoy suddenly veered off the main road, heading toward a narrow path that led up the mountainside. Maria realized with growing alarm that they were driving directly toward her team's position. Either this was an attack, or someone in that convoy desperately needed to reach her. "All stations, possible hostile approach on R6, she announced to her squad. Weapons raised, and safety switches clicked off in unison. 12 highly trained soldiers prepared for what might be their final firefight. But as the vehicle climbed the treacherous path, Maria noticed something that changed everything. The driver was deliberately avoiding the rough patches that would make noise, choosing a route that kept the engine's sound to a minimum. This wasn't an assault. This was someone trying to approach without alerting the other vehicles in the convoy or any potential listeners on radio frequencies. The vehicle stopped about 200 meters from their position, just out of direct line of sight from the row below. The woman Maria had seen earlier stepped out alone, her hands clearly visible and empty of weapons. She began walking slowly toward the rocks where Maria's team was concealed. "I need to talk to Captain Santos," the woman called out in accented English. Her voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. "I have information about her family." Maria felt the world tilt around her. No one here knew about her family, because as far as anyone knew, she didn't have one. The official records listed her as an orphan with no known relatives. She'd built her entire adult identity around that fact. "Rodriguez, take command," she whispered into her radio. "I'm going to find out what this is about." "Captain," that could be Rodriguez started to protest, but Maria was already moving. She kept her rifle ready, but pointed downward as she emerged from cover. The woman stopped walking and waited, her posture suggesting neither threat nor surrender. As Maria got closer, the familiarity she'd felt earlier became overwhelming. The woman's facial structure, the way she held her shoulders, even her walk, everything triggered memories that couldn't quite surface but felt absolutely real. It was like looking at a mirror that showed her what she might become in 25 years. "My name is Elena Vasquez," the woman said when they were close enough to speak normally. "I've been looking for you for a very long time, Maria." The way she pronounced Maria's name was different from how everyone else said it. There was a musical quality to it that seemed to unlock something deep in Maria's memory. "I don't know you," Maria replied, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Some part of her recognized this woman on a level deeper than conscious memory. Elena reached slowly into her jacket and pulled out a small object. It was a coin, old and tarnished, with symbols engraved on both sides. "This belonged to your father," she said simply. "He gave it to me before he died, and made me promise to find you someday." Maria stared at the coin, her hands trembling slightly. One side bore a date, her birth date. The other side showed a symbol she'd been drawing unconsciously in notebooks, and sand since childhood, never knowing why it felt important. "The convoy," Maria managed to say. "What is this really about?" Elena's expression grew grim. "Those weapons aren't being transported by enemies. They're being moved by people trying to escape the same organization that killed your parents and destroyed every record of your existence." She paused, studying Maria's face. "The same organization that's been watching you your entire military career, waiting to see if you inherited your father's abilities." Before Maria could ask what abilities she meant, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Elena's face went pale. "They found us," she said urgently. "Maria, everything you think you know about your life, about this mission, about why you're really here, it's all been carefully arranged. You were never supposed to survive long enough to learn the truth." The helicopters were getting closer, and Maria could see they weren't American aircraft. Her radio, suddenly, erupted with frantic voices from her squad. "Captain, we've got multiple aircraft inbound, unknown origin. Overwatch is not responding to our calls." Maria looked at Elena, then at the coin still gleaming in the woman's palm. Every rational part of her mind insisted this was an enemy trick, an elaborate psychological operation designed to compromise her mission. But deeper instincts, ones she'd learned to trust in combat situations, were telling her that this woman held the key to questions she'd been afraid to ask her entire life. "If what you're saying is true," Maria said carefully, "then my squad is in danger because of me." Elena nodded grimly. "Everyone you care about is in danger because of who you are. But if you come with me now, I can help you understand what you're really capable of and why so many people want you dead." The helicopters were close enough now that Maria could see armed figures preparing to rappel from them. Her squad's voices on the radio were becoming increasingly panicked as they realized they were vastly outnumbered and surrounded. Maria made a choice that would change everything. She grabbed the coin from Elena's hand, feeling an electric shock run through her fingers as she touched it. Suddenly, images flashed through her mind. A man with kind eyes teaching a small girl to shoot, a woman singing lullabies in a language she couldn't identify, and fire, so much fire, destroying everything she'd ever known. "Go," she told Elena firmly. "Get back to your vehicle and get out of here. I want to abandon my soldiers." But Elena grabbed her arm. "Maria, you don't understand. Your squad isn't in danger because you're here. They're in danger because they're witnesses to this meeting. The only way to save them is to give those people what they came for." "Which is what?" Elena's eyes were filled with tears. "You, Maria. They came for you. They've always been coming for you." The first helicopter touched down, disgorging a team of heavily armed soldiers who moved with the precision of elite special forces. But these weren't any military unit Maria recognized. Their equipment was too advanced, their coordination too perfect. She raised her radio to her lips. "All stations, this is Falcon 1. Execute emergency extraction protocol immediately. Do not wait for me. Do not attempt rescue. That is a direct order." The responses from her squad were immediate protests, but Maria had trained them too well. They would follow orders even when they disagreed. She turned back to Elena, still holding the mysterious coin. It felt warm in her palm, almost alive. "If I go with you, what happens to everything I've built? My career, my identity, everything I am?" "Everything you think you was built on lies," Elena said gently. "But everything you could become, that's still waiting for you to discover." The sounds of her squad's tactical withdrawal echoed from the ridge above. They were good soldiers. They would make it to the extraction point safely. But Maria realized she wouldn't be joining them. For the first time in her adult life, she was choosing the unknown over the familiar. "Tell me one thing," she said to Elena as the armed figures began surrounding them. "The orphanage fire that destroyed my records, was that real?" Elena's smile was sad, but proud. "You set that fire yourself when you were 7 years old. You were trying to escape to find your parents, and you had no idea that your emotions could manifest as actual flame." She paused, watching Maria's expression. "That's when they knew for certain who you were. That's when they decided you were too dangerous to live freely." Maria felt the world shift around her as suppressed memories began fighting their way to the surface. The coin in her hand grew warmer, and suddenly she could remember the feeling of fire dancing on her fingertips, responding to her like a loyal pet. "My rifle," she realized suddenly, "when it jammed during training last week. I put that coin in the firing mechanism," Elena admitted. "I needed a way to meet you that wouldn't immediately trigger their surveillance systems. I've been trying to reach you for months." The armed figures were close enough now that Maria could see their faces. They looked professional, emotionless, like people who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. But they also looked wary, as if they were approaching something dangerous. "Last question," Maria said, never taking her eyes off the approaching soldiers. "What was my real name before they made me into Maria Santos?" Elena's answer changed everything. "Your name was Isabella Fuego. Your father could control fire, and your mother could see the future. The night they died, she left me with very specific instructions about what to tell you when I finally found you, which was that the organization hunting you has one weakness. They're terrified of what you might become if you ever learn to use your abilities intentionally." Elena pressed something else into Maria's other hand, a small device that looked like a GPS tracker. "This will lead you to others like us. People who've been hiding for decades, waiting for someone strong enough to fight back." The soldiers were 20 feet away now. Maria could see the leader making hand signals to his team. In seconds, they would be in custody or dead. "One more thing," Elena said urgently. "Your mother's final message. She said to tell you that your real war hasn't started yet. Everything up until now has just been training." Maria closed her eyes and felt something shift deep in her chest. When she opened them again, the coin in her palm was glowing with soft heat, and she could sense every weapon pointed at her as clearly as if she could see them. For the first time in her life, Captain Maria Santos, Isabella Fuego, was ready to stop running from who she really was. The soldiers raised their weapons, and Maria smiled. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life without knowing it. The first soldier's rifle clicked empty without firing a single shot. Maria watched with growing amazement as weapon after weapon malfunctioned around her. The metal was heating up in the soldiers' hands, forcing them to drop their guns as the barrels became too hot to hold. She wasn't consciously controlling it, but somehow her emotions were affecting every piece of metal within 50 feet. Elena grabbed her arm. "We need to move. Now." You're broadcasting your location to every sensitive instrument in a 100-mile radius. She was already running toward the vehicle, and Maria found herself following the mysterious GPS device clutched in her left hand while the warm coin remained in her right. Behind them, the elite soldiers were regrouping, pulling out backup weapons that seemed to be made from different materials. Maria heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging up, technology she'd never encountered in her military service, but somehow recognized on an instinctual level. "Those aren't government issue," she called to Elena as they reached the armored SUV. "Because they're not government," Elena replied, starting the engine. "The organization hunting you operates across national boundaries. They have resources that make most militaries look like amateur groups." She gunned the engine, and they lurched forward down a path that seemed barely wide enough for the vehicle. Maria looked back to see energy beams slicing through the air where they'd been standing. The beams left smoking trails in the rock, cutting through stone as easily as through paper. What exactly did my parents do to make these people so angry? Elena's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the treacherous mountain road. Your father discovered their operation 15 years ago. They were kidnapping children with unusual abilities and either recruiting them or eliminating them. He tried to expose them, and they killed him for it. Your mother went underground with you, but they found her eventually. The path they were following seemed to exist only in Elena's memory. There were no markers, no signs, just a barely visible track that wound through terrain Maria would have considered impassable. Yet Elena drove with confidence, as if she'd traveled this route countless times. "The GPS device," Maria said, examining the small black object in her palm. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "When you're ready, it will guide you to a place where people like us gather. A place where you can learn to control your abilities properly instead of just letting them react to your emotions." Elena glanced at her. "But first, you need to understand what you're really up against." They crested a ridge, and Maria saw a sight that made her heart sink. Below them, her extraction point was surrounded by vehicles and aircraft. Smoke was rising from several locations, and she could hear the distant sound of gunfire. Her squad was under attack. "I have to help them," Maria said, reaching for her rifle. "You'll only make it worse," Elena said firmly. "Every time you use your abilities without training, you create a bigger signature. Right now, they're probably trying to capture your soldiers alive to use as leverage against you. If you show up, they'll kill everyone just to eliminate witnesses." Maria watched helplessly as helicopters circled the area where her people were trapped. These weren't rescue aircraft. They were predators circling wounded prey. She grabbed her radio, hoping to reach someone, but found only static. Her entire unit was being systematically cut off from the outside world. "Rodriguez," she whispered, knowing no one could hear her. "Peterson, Johnson, Williams." Each name felt like a weight on her chest. These people had trusted her, followed her, and now they were paying the price for her existence. Elena reached over and touched her shoulder gently. "I know it hurts. I lost people too when I was running. But the best way to honor them is to become strong enough to prevent this from happening to others." They continued driving in silence for several minutes, the path gradually leading them away from the combat zone. Maria found herself studying Elena more closely, trying to reconcile this woman's claims with everything she thought she knew about her own life. "You said you've been looking for me for a long time. How long exactly?" 21 years, Elena replied without hesitation. Since the night your mother died. I promised her I would find you when you were old enough to handle the truth and train you to use your inheritance properly. 21 years, Maria repeated. You've been searching for me since I was 7 years old? Not searching, watching. I've known where you were almost continuously. The orphanage, your foster families, high school, your army training. I even had contacts who made sure you were assigned to units where your abilities were less likely to manifest unexpectedly. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. My entire life has been managed by you people. Managed, no. Protected, yes. There's a difference. Elena slowed the vehicle as they approached what looked like a solid rock wall. She pressed something on the dashboard, and a section of the rock slid aside, revealing a tunnel entrance. The organization hunting you has had the same level of awareness, but their intentions were very different from mine. They drove into the tunnel, and Maria was surprised by the sophisticated lighting and ventilation systems that became visible once they were inside. This wasn't a natural cave or a simple hiding place. Someone had spent considerable resources creating this facility. How many people know about this place? Maria asked. Fewer every year, Elena said grimly. The organization is very good at finding us. We've lost 3 safe houses in the past 2 years alone. She parked the vehicle in what appeared to be an underground garage containing several other cars and trucks. But this location has certain natural advantages that make it harder for them to detect. As they walked through corridors carved from living rock, Maria noticed symbols carved into the walls. Some of them matched the symbol from the coin, while others triggered the same deep recognition she'd felt when Elena first approached her. These weren't random decorations. They were a language of some kind, and part of her mind understood their meaning even though she'd never seen them before. My parents taught me to read these symbols, she said, running her fingers over a particularly complex carving. Your parents never had the chance to teach you anything, Elena corrected gently. But the knowledge was passed to you genetically. It's part of what makes you so valuable to both sides of this conflict. They emerged into a large cavern that had been converted into a living space. Multiple levels have been carved into the walls, connected by staircases and bridges that seemed to defy normal architectural principles. People moved about their daily activities, but Maria noticed they all stopped to stare at her as she passed. They know who I am, she observed. They know who your parents were, Elena said. Your father was something of a legend among our people. He could control fire with a precision that bordered on artistic. Your mother could see potential futures with accuracy that saved hundreds of lives. The combination of their abilities in their child was something many people have been hoping for. An older man approached them, walking with a cane, but moving with the alert posture of someone accustomed to danger. His eyes were the palest blue Maria had ever seen, and when he looked at her, she felt as if he was reading her thoughts. Isabella, he said in a voice that carried a slight accent. You look exactly like your mother did at your age. He extended his hand. My name is Marcus Chun. I worked with your parents before they died. Maria shook his hand and was surprised by the strength of his grip. Everyone keeps talking about my parents like they were famous. What exactly did they do? Marcus exchanged a glance with Elena. They were part of a resistance network. People with abilities like yours have been persecuted for centuries, but about 30 years ago, an organization decided to change tactics. Instead of eliminating us, they would study us, control us, and use us for their own purposes. He led them to a seating area furnished with chairs that looked hand-carved but comfortable. Around them, the cavern buzzed with quiet activity. Maria could see people practicing what looked like martial arts, others working with equipment she didn't recognize, and children playing games that seemed to involve manipulating light and shadow. Your parents discovered that the organization was planning something called the Integration Protocol, Marcus continued. They were going to use people with our abilities to gain control over global governments and financial systems. Essentially, they wanted to rule the world from the shadows. Maria felt the coin in her pocket growing warm again. Without thinking, she pulled it out and set it on the small table between them. All three adults stared at it in silence. I've never seen it glow like that, Elena whispered. Glow. Maria looked down and realized the symbols on the coin were indeed emitting a soft, steady light. It's been warm since I touched it, but I didn't realize it was visible to other people. Marcus leaned forward intently. Isabella, have you had any unusual experiences lately? Dreams that seemed too real, moments where you knew things you shouldn't have known, instances where technology behaved strangely around you. Maria thought about the past few weeks. Her rifle jamming repeatedly during training exercises. The way her computer kept malfunctioning whenever she was stressed. Dreams filled with conversations in a language she couldn't identify, but somehow understood. Yes, but I thought it was just stress from deployment. The abilities are manifesting because you're reaching the age when they stabilize, Elena explained. Most people like us experience their full power for the first time sometime between 25 and 30. You're 28 now. And the organization knows this, Marcus added grimly. That's why they chose now to make their move. They needed to capture or eliminate you before you became too powerful to handle. A younger woman approached their group, moving with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. She had short black hair and eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. Marcus, we've got a problem. The satellite feeds are showing unusual military activity in a 300-mile radius around Isabella's last known location. This is Sarah Kim, Elena said by way of introduction. She handles our intelligence gathering. Sarah nodded at Maria, then continued her report. It looks like they've declared the entire region a training exercise zone and evacuated all civilian populations. Whatever they're planning, they want to make sure there are no witnesses. Maria felt her anger rising, and the coin's glow intensified. They're going to kill my soldiers to cover up their operation. Not necessarily, Marcus said carefully. If they capture your squad alive, they can use them as test subjects. People who've been in close contact with you might have been affected by residual energy from your abilities. They'll want to study that. The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. Her soldiers weren't just in danger because of her. They might be turned into laboratory animals because she'd unknowingly exposed them to something that made them valuable to these monsters. I need to get them out, she said, standing up abruptly. The coin's light was now bright enough to cast shadows on the cavern walls. I can't let them suffer because of what I am. You can't save them by charging in unprepared, Elena said firmly. But if you're willing to learn quickly, we might be able to mount a rescue operation that actually has a chance of success. Sarah was studying her tablet intently. Actually, we might have a window of opportunity. The organization's forces are concentrating around the extraction point, but they're not actually moving in yet. It looks like they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Maria asked. Marcus stood up, his expression grim. For you to come to them. This whole operation is designed to draw you out into the open where they can capture you. Your squad is bait. Maria looked around the cavern at all the people who were watching her with expressions of hope and fear. Children who reminded her of herself at 7 years old. Adults who carried the weight of years spent hiding from an implacable enemy. These people were looking at her as if she might be their salvation. What exactly do you think I can do? She asked. Yesterday, I was a regular army captain. Today I find out I'm some kind of genetic anomaly that people want to weaponize. I don't even know how to control whatever it is I can do. Elena smiled for the first time since they'd met. That's where the accelerated training comes in. Marcus, how long do we have before they lose patience and start eliminating prisoners? Based on their past operations, maybe 6 hours, Marcus replied. They'll want to interrogate the soldiers first, try to learn everything they can about Isabella's recent behavior and capabilities. 6 hours to learn abilities that took your parents years to master, Sarah said doubtfully. Isabella isn't starting from nothing, Elena pointed out. She's been unconsciously using her abilities for years. She just needs to learn how to do it intentionally. She looked at Maria directly. Are you willing to try? The training will be intense, possibly dangerous, and there's no guarantee it will work. Maria looked at the coin in her palm. The symbols were still glowing, but Now she could almost make out their meaning. One showed fire under control, shaped into useful tools. Another showed the joining of different elements to create something stronger than either could be alone. The third symbol was harder to interpret, but it seemed to represent the moment when potential becomes reality. If I do this training and somehow succeed in rescuing my squad, what happens after that? Do I go back to my old life and pretend none of this ever happened? Your old life ended the moment you touched that coin, Marcus said gently. But your new life could be something extraordinary. You could help us build a world where people like us don't have to hide, where children with abilities aren't kidnapped or killed, where the organization finally faces real opposition. Maria thought about Rodriguez, Peterson, Johnson, and Williams. They were good people who'd followed her into danger because they trusted her leadership. If she could save them, did it matter what the cost to her old identity might be? "What's the first lesson?" she asked. Elena's smile widened. "Learning to control fire without burning down the entire mountain." As if responding to her words, small flames began dancing around Maria's fingers. For the first time, instead of feeling afraid of the fire, she felt like she was coming home. Outside, somewhere in the mountains, her soldiers were waiting for rescue they didn't even know was possible. And for the first time in her life, Maria had the power to give it to them. The training was about to begin. The training chamber was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them, and the floor was marked with intricate patterns that reminded her of both military tactical diagrams and ancient artwork. Marcus stood in the center, his pale blue eyes reflecting the light from various crystals embedded in the ceiling. "The first thing you need to understand," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the space, "is that your abilities are not separate from you. They're not tools you pick up and put down. They're expressions of your deepest self, which means controlling them requires absolute honesty about who you are and what you want." Maria looked down at her hands. The flames that had appeared earlier were gone, but she could feel warmth just beneath her skin, like a furnace waiting to be stoked. In the army, we're trained to compartmentalize, to separate emotion from action. "That training will work against you here," Elena said from her position near the wall. She was monitoring several screens that showed the tactical situation outside. "Your abilities respond to authentic emotion, not control behavior. The organization's operatives are dangerous partly because they've learned to suppress their natural feelings, but that same suppression limits their power." Marcus walked over to a series of metal targets arranged around the chamber. "Your father could create fire that burned at precisely the temperature needed for any task. Welding metal, cooking food, even performing delicate surgery. But first, he had to accept that destruction and creation are two aspects of the same force." "Show me," Maria said. Marcus extended his hand toward one of the metal targets. A thin stream of blue flame emerged from his palm, so controlled that Maria could see it bend and curve like water. The flame touched the metal target and began reshaping it, turning a simple disc into an intricate sculpture of a bird in flight. The metal glowed and flowed under his direction, but never melted into an uncontrolled puddle. "Now you try," he said simply. Maria approached another target and extended her hand the way Marcus had. Nothing happened. She concentrated harder, trying to will fire to appear. Still nothing. Frustration began building in her chest. "Stop trying to force it," Elena called out. "Think about someone you want to protect." Maria's mind immediately went to Sergeant Peterson, who had a photograph of his young daughter taped inside his helmet. He'd shown it to her during their first deployment together, explaining that keeping his family safe was why he'd joined the army in the first place. The thought of him being tortured or experimented on because of her sent a surge of anger through her body. Fire erupted from her hands in a chaotic explosion that filled half the chamber. Marcus threw up a barrier of some kind, and Elena dove behind one of the consoles. The flames were orange and red, wild and uncontrolled, consuming everything they touched. Too much emotion, Marcus said calmly, his barrier still holding against the inferno. You need to find the balance between feeling and focus. The fire was feeding on her anger, growing stronger every second. Maria could feel it pulling energy from her body, demanding more fuel for its rage. If she didn't stop it soon, she would either burn herself out or bring down the entire mountain. I can't control it, she gasped. Yes, you can, Elena said firmly. Think about what you want the fire to do, not what you're angry about. Purpose, not passion. Maria forced herself to think beyond her rage. She wanted to save her soldiers. She wanted to protect the people in this cavern. She wanted to stop an organization that kidnapped children and turned them into weapons. The fire began to respond to her intentions rather than her emotions, shifting from chaotic destruction to focused energy. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the flames back toward herself. They resisted at first like wild animals that had been allowed to run free. But as she maintained her focus on protective rather than destructive goals, the fire began to take shape. Instead of an explosion, she had a controlled blaze that danced around her hands without burning her skin. Better, Marcus said, lowering his barrier. Now try to direct it toward a specific target with a specific intention. Maria looked at the metal disc that was her target. She wanted to change it into something beautiful, something that represented hope instead of destruction. The fire flowed from her hands in a steady stream, much more controlled than before, but still lacking the precision Marcus had demonstrated. The metal began to glow and soften under her flame. But instead of shaping it into something recognizable, she was simply melting it into an abstract blob. She tried to form specific shapes, but the fire seemed to have ideas of its own about what the metal should become. You're fighting yourself, Marcus observed. Part of you wants to create, but part of you is still afraid of your own power. The metal is responding to that conflict. Maria stopped the flow of fire and stepped back. The target was now a twisted mass of cooled metal that looked more like scar tissue than art. This is impossible. I don't have time to spend months learning meditation and self-awareness. You don't have months, Sarah's voice came from the entrance to the chamber. She was carrying her tablet and looked urgent. I've been monitoring their communications. They're starting the interrogation phase with your squad leader. Rodriguez, Maria said, her heart clenching. They're not just asking questions, Sarah continued. They're using some kind of technology that affects memory and cognitive function. If they continue for more than an hour, the changes could be permanent. Maria felt the fire responding to her distress, heating up around her hands again. But this time, instead of fighting it, she tried to channel the energy into determination rather than panic. How long do we have? Maybe 40 minutes before they start on the next soldier, Elena said, checking her own monitoring equipment. The good news is that they're so focused on the interrogation that they've pulled back most of their perimeter guards. If we move now, we might be able to get close to their position. With what? Maria asked. I can barely control my abilities, and I don't even know what the rest of you can do. Marcus smiled grimly. Time for the advanced course. He walked to a different section of the chamber where various weapons were mounted on the walls. But these weren't conventional military hardware. They looked like they belonged to a science fiction movie, all smooth curves and glowing components. Weapons designed specifically for people with abilities, he explained, taking down what looked like a rifle that had been crafted from crystal and metal. They amplify and focus your natural power instead of replacing it. He handed Maria a weapon that felt warm to the touch. The moment her fingers closed around it, she could feel it connecting to the energy flowing through her body. It was like holding a musical instrument that was already tuned to her frequency. This will help you direct your fire with precision, Marcus said. But it won't make you more powerful. It just makes your existing power more controllable. Elena was suiting up an armor that seemed to shift and change color as she moved. I manipulate electromagnetic fields, she explained, which means I can interfere with their technology and communications. She picked up a device that looked like a cross between a computer and a weapon. Marcus affects gravity and spatial relationships. And Sarah? Maria asked. I see probability streams, Sarah said simply. I can tell you the likelihood of success for different approaches. She frowned at her tablet. Right now, a direct assault has about a 12% chance of succeeding without casualties. What about indirect approaches? If we can create enough chaos to divide their attention, success rates jump to about 60%. Sarah looked up at Maria. The key variable is whether you can use your abilities effectively under combat stress. Maria looked around at these people who were willing to risk everything to help rescue her soldiers. They barely knew her, but they were treating her like family. Why are you doing this? Why risk your lives for people you've never met? Because every person they capture and experiment on makes them stronger, Marcus said simply. Your soldiers aren't just victims. They're potential weapons in enemy hands. We can't afford to let that happen. Elena checked her equipment one final time. Plus, you're not the only one with people to protect. Everyone in this cavern has lost someone to the organization. This is our chance to fight back. The rescue plan, Maria said. What exactly are we going to do? Sarah pulled up a holographic display that showed the terrain around the enemy position. They have your squad in a temporary facility about 15 miles from here. It's well defended, but they're using standard military tactics. They don't expect to face people with our capabilities. The display zoomed in to show the layout of the enemy camp. Maria counted at least 50 hostile personnel, multiple vehicles, and what looked like heavy weapons emplacements. 4 against 50. I like those odds. We're not going to fight 50 people, Marcus said. We're going to make them fight each other. He pointed to various positions on the map. Elena creates electromagnetic interference that disables their communications and weapons. I alter the local gravity field to make their vehicles and aircraft inoperable. Sarah guides us along probability paths that avoid the highest concentrations of enemies. Enemy, you create a distraction large enough that they think they're under attack by a much larger force, Elena said. While they're dealing with your fire, the rest of us extract your people. Maria studied the tactical display, her military training automatically identifying weak points and optimal approaches. It could work, but we need precise timing. If any part of this goes wrong, we'll be trapped in the middle of their position with no backup and no way out. Welcome to life outside the military structure, Marcus said with dry humor. No support, no backup, no safety net. Just us against them. Sarah was monitoring something on her tablet. We need to move now. The probability of success starts dropping rapidly after the next 30 minutes. They made their way through corridors that led to a different exit from the mountain base. Maria was surprised by how many people they passed, all of whom stopped their activities to watch the rescue team depart. Some called out encouragement, others simply nodded with respect. A few children ran up to touch Maria's hand before being gently pulled back by adults. They think you're going to change everything, Elena explained as they reached the vehicle staging area. Your parents were legends, but they died before they could accomplish their larger goals. People have been waiting for you to take up where they left off. No pressure, Maria muttered, but she was beginning to understand the weight of expectation these people were carrying. They'd been hiding, running, and losing friends for decades. The idea that someone might finally be strong enough to take the fight to their enemies was intoxicating. The vehicle they climbed in looked like a standard military truck from the outside, but Maria quickly realized it had been heavily modified. The engine was almost silent. The armor plating was thicker than anything she'd seen, and the navigation system was displaying information that didn't match any military GPS she was familiar with. Sarah's probability sight lets us avoid detection, Elena explained as they drove through terrain that should have been impassable. We're following a route that has less than a 2% chance of encountering enemy patrols. Maria checked the crystal weapon Marcus had given her. It felt natural in her hands now, and she could sense its eagerness to channel her fire. Once we start this, there's no going back, is there? Even if we succeed, the organization will know about this place, about all of you. They already know, Marcus said grimly. The moment you use your abilities in front of their operatives, every safe house and hidden community became a target. This rescue mission isn't just about saving your soldiers. It's about proving that we're not helpless victims anymore. They crested a hill, and Maria could see the enemy facility in the distance. Floodlights illuminated a compound that looked like it had been assembled in hours rather than days. Temporary, but efficient, designed to process prisoners quickly and then disappear without leaving evidence. Remember, Elena said as they approached their final position, your goal isn't to kill everyone. It's to create enough chaos that they can't coordinate their response. Let your fire be seen from multiple directions. Make them think they're surrounded. Maria nodded, but she was thinking about Rodriguez, Peterson, Johnson, and Williams. They'd followed her into danger because they trusted her judgment. Now she was about to use abilities she barely understood to attempt a rescue that defied every principle of military tactics she'd ever learned. The crystal weapon hummed with contained energy, responding to her rising determination. For better or worse, Captain Maria Santos was about to become someone completely new, and her soldiers' lives depended on how quickly she could make that transformation work. The rescue began at precisely 2:47 a.m., when Elena sent the first electromagnetic pulse through the enemy compound. Maria watched from her position on a ridge overlooking the facility as lights flickered and died throughout the temporary structures. Emergency generators kicked in immediately, but Elena was already targeting those with focused bursts that overloaded their circuits. Phase 1 complete. Elena's voice came through the specialized communication devices Marcus had given them. Their main communications are down, but they'll have backup systems online within minutes. Phase 2, Marcus replied, and suddenly, the enemy vehicles began behaving strangely. Trucks that had been parked on level ground started rolling backward up slopes that defied physics. A helicopter attempting to take off found itself pressed against the ground by invisible weight that made its rotors useless. Jesus, Maria whispered, watching gravity itself become a weapon in Marcus's hands. Phase 3, Sarah said. Maria, you need to create your first distraction at the coordinates I'm marking on your display. Make it look like an attack from the south. Maria looked at the crystal weapon in her hands. During their brief drive to the position, she'd practiced channeling small amounts of fire through the device. But now she needed to create something that would convince 50 trained soldiers that they were under assault by a superior force. She took a deep breath and thought about Rodriguez's daughter, about Peterson's quiet dedication, about Johnson's nervous jokes before every mission, about Williams's determination to prove himself worthy of the team. The crystal weapon began to glow in response to her emotions, and she could feel fire building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. Make it count, she told herself, and raised the weapon toward the southernmost buildings of the compound. The fire that emerged wasn't the chaotic explosion from her training session. It was a controlled stream of energy that split into multiple branches as it traveled through the air, creating the impression of coordinated fire from several different weapons. The streams hit various targets around the compound's perimeter, setting fires that burned with unusual intensity and created smoke patterns that suggested a much larger attacking force. The response was immediate. Maria could see soldiers running toward defensive positions, setting up weapons to return fire against enemies that existed only in their assumptions. Searchlights swept the terrain to the south, revealing nothing but empty ground and the mysterious fires that continued to burn despite having nothing obvious to fuel them. Beautiful, Elena said admiringly. They're completely focused on the wrong direction. But Maria was already moving to her second position. Sarah's probability calculations had identified a sequence of locations where Maria could create fires that would maintain the illusion of a surrounding enemy force while avoiding areas where return fire might actually hit her. Prisoner Building is the large structure at the center of the compound, Marcus said through the comm. I'm moving in from the north while they're distracted. Sarah, what's my probability of reaching the building without detection? 87% if you maintain current approach speed, Sarah replied. But that drops to 40% once you're inside the building. There are too many variables once you're in close contact with the prisoners. Maria reached her second position and sent another barrage of fire toward the compound, this time from the eastern approach. She was getting better at controlling the crystal weapon, learning to make her fire dance, and weave in patterns that suggested multiple shooters with different types of weapons. The enemy response was growing more frantic, and she could hear shouting and confusion even at her distance. Maria, Elena said urgently, they're bringing up some kind of specialist equipment. Technology one haven't seen before. It's not affected by my electromagnetic interference. Through her scope, Maria could see figures in different uniforms setting up devices that glowed with the same kind of energy she'd seen in the weapons that had fired on her and Elena during their first encounter. These weren't standard military personnel. They were organization operatives with technology designed specifically to counter people with abilities. Marcus, you need to accelerate your timeline, Sarah said. Probability of success is dropping rapidly. Whatever those devices are, they're going to change the tactical situation. Understood, Marcus replied, and through her scope, Maria saw something that defied every law of physics she understood. Marcus simply walked through the wall of the prisoner building. Not through a door or window, through the solid wall itself, as if it was made of mist rather than concrete and steel. But the organization operatives were setting up their devices faster than anticipated. Maria could see energy fields beginning to form around the compound, creating barriers that shimmered with the same dangerous light she'd encountered earlier. They're trying to contain the entire area, Elena said with growing alarm. If they complete that energy field, none of us will be able to leave. Maria made a decision that went against every tactical principle she'd ever learned. Instead of maintaining her position and continuing the deception, she stood up and began running directly toward the compound. The crystal weapon felt hot in her hands, responding to her determination and desperation. "What are you doing?" Elena's voice was sharp with concern. "Changing the plan," Maria replied, vaulting over obstacles as she charged down the slope toward the enemy position. "If they're containing the area, then let's give them something real to contain." She could see muzzle flashes as enemy soldiers spotted her approach and began directing fire in her direction. But instead of taking cover, Maria channeled fire through the crystal weapon in a continuous stream that surrounded her like armor. Bullets struck the flames and were vaporized before they could reach her body. "This is insane," Sarah said. "Probability of survival is dropping below 20%. "Sometimes you have to make your own odds," Maria replied, reaching the perimeter of the compound. She raised the crystal weapon and sent a massive pulse of fire directly into the nearest energy field generator. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, creating a gap in the containment field. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Every soldier in the compound turned their attention toward her, converging on her position with automatic weapons and energy-based firearms. But Maria was no longer the uncertain woman who had struggled to control small flames in the training chamber. Combat was familiar territory, and now she had the power to fight back on equal terms. She moved through the compound like a living storm, the crystal weapon channeling her fire in all directions. Buildings that had seemed solid melted under her assault. Vehicles twisted into unusable scrap. Weapons overheated in the hands of soldiers who found themselves facing an enemy they had no training to combat. "I found them." Marcus's voice came through the comm. "All 4 soldiers alive, but they've been drugged with something that affects memory and cognitive function. I need time to figure out how to move them safely." "How much time?" Maria asked, deflecting an energy beam that would have taken her head off. 5 minutes minimum." Maria looked around at the chaos surrounding her. She was holding the attention of the entire enemy force, but she couldn't maintain this level of output indefinitely. Already she could feel the drain on her energy, and the crystal weapon was beginning to feel uncomfortably hot in her hands. "Elena, can you get to Marcus's position and help with the extraction?" "Already moving," Elena replied. But, Maria, you're pushing yourself too hard. Your energy signature is visible from orbit. Every organization operative within 1,000 miles knows where you are now. Good, Maria said grimly, sending another wave of fire toward a group of soldiers who were trying to set up a heavy weapon. Let them all come. I'm tired of running. But, even as she spoke, she could see new vehicles approaching the compound from multiple directions. The organization was calling in reinforcements, and these looked like specialist teams equipped specifically to deal with people like her. Sarah, new probability assessment? There was a long pause before Sarah replied. If reinforcements reach the compound before Marcus completes the extraction, probability of mission success drops to 0. Probability of any of us surviving drops to single digits. Through the smoke and flames, Maria could see Marcus emerging from the prisoner building. He was somehow carrying all 4 of her soldiers simultaneously, their bodies floating beside him as if gravity had simply decided to stop affecting them. But he was moving slowly, and the approaching reinforcements would reach the compound before he could get clear. Maria made a choice that would haunt her for years afterward. She gathered every bit of fire she could channel through the crystal weapon and sent it not toward the enemy soldiers, but toward the ammunition and fuel storage areas she'd identified during her initial assault. The explosions were massive, creating a wall of flame and destruction that separated Marcus from the approaching reinforcements. But the effort left her completely drained. The crystal weapon went dark in her hands, and she could feel her legs giving out beneath her. She'd bought Marcus the time he needed, but at the cost of her ability to defend herself. Maria's down. Elena's voice was tight with concern. I'm moving to her position, but I can't carry both her and maintain the electromagnetic interference. Leave me, Maria said weakly. She was lying behind the wreckage of what had been a vehicle, watching enemy soldiers cautiously approaching her position. Get my people out. That's what matters. Not happening, Marcus replied firmly. Elena, maintain interference for 30 more seconds. Sarah, I need the most probable escape route from Maria's current position. Northwest, following the drainage ditch, Sarah said immediately. But, Marcus, you can't carry 5 people and manipulate gravity fields simultaneously. Watch me, Marcus said. Maria felt herself being lifted gently from the ground, along with her 4 unconscious soldiers. Marcus was somehow affecting the gravitational field around all of them, making them weightless while he guided their movement away from the compound. But she could see the strain on his face as he pushed his abilities beyond their normal limits. The reinforcements are breaching the firewall, Elena reported. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. They were moving through the air above the compound, invisible to the soldiers below who were dealing with the aftermath of Maria's explosive finale. But organization operatives with energy weapons were taking positions that would give them clear shots once they identified the escape route. Sarah, Marcus said through gritted teeth, I need to know which direction gives us the best chance of avoiding those energy weapons. They're anticipating our escape routes, Sarah said grimly. Probability of avoiding detection is less than 30% regardless of direction. Maria looked at the crystal weapon in her hands. It was dark now, but she could still feel warmth deep within its structure. Maybe she had enough left for one final effort. Marcus, can you get everyone except me to safety? Maria, no, we're not leaving you behind. You're not leaving me behind, Maria said, forcing herself to focus despite her exhaustion. You're giving me a chance to make sure they can't follow us. Before any of them could object, Maria dropped out of Marcus's gravitational field and fell back toward the compound. But instead of hitting the ground hard, she channeled the last of her fire through the crystal weapon to create a controlled descent that brought her down in the middle of the organization operatives. They were so surprised by her sudden appearance that she had time for one final attack. She pressed the crystal weapon against the largest energy field generator and poured every bit of remaining power into it. The resulting explosion destroyed not just that device, but created a chain reaction that took out the entire network of organization technology. When the smoke cleared, Maria found herself surrounded by unconscious operatives and twisted wreckage. The crystal weapon had shattered in her hands, but the organization's ability to track or pursue her friends was gone. She looked up to see a familiar helicopter approaching from the west. Not organization aircraft, but a rescue chopper bearing U.S. military markings. Somehow, word of the situation had reached legitimate authorities. As medical personnel loaded her onto a stretcher, Maria felt the original coin Elena had given her pressing against her ribs where she'd tucked it into her uniform. It was still warm, still glowing softly with symbols that seemed to promise this was only the beginning of her story. Rodriguez, Peterson, Johnson, and Williams were safe. The organization had lost a major facility and significant resources, and Maria had finally begun to understand who she really was. But the war Elena had warned her about was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in a sterile debriefing room at Fort Campbell, facing a panel of officers who represented the highest levels of military intelligence. Her uniform bore new ribbons, commendations for heroism in combat, but the men and women questioning her seemed more interested in details she couldn't officially provide. "Captain Santos," said Colonel Morrison, the lead investigator, "your report states that you were separated from your unit during the convoy interdiction and managed to escape capture through conventional evasion tactics. Yet satellite imagery shows energy signatures and thermal patterns that don't match any known military technology." Maria kept her expression neutral. "Sir, I can only report what I personally observed and experienced. The enemy forces were using equipment I didn't recognize, possibly experimental technology from unknown sources." It was technically true. She had observed unknown technology, experienced things outside normal military parameters, and been separated from her unit during combat operations. The fact that she'd been actively participating in those unknown technologies wasn't something she could explain without revealing Elena, Marcus, and Sarah. "Your soldiers," continued Major Williams, consulting a thick file, "Rodriguez, Peterson, Johnson, and Private Williams all report memory gaps from the time of their capture until their recovery by the rescue team. Medical examination shows evidence of drug-induced amnesia, but no permanent cognitive damage." "I'm grateful they're safe, sir," Maria replied. And she was. Her 4 soldiers have been returned to active duty with clean bills of health. The organization's experimental drugs had worn off without lasting effects, leaving them with fragmentary memories that could be attributed to combat stress and trauma. "The thing is, Captain," Colonel Morrison leaned forward, "your record over the past 8 years shows a pattern of unusual occurrences. Equipment malfunctions, unexplained tactical successes, instances where your presence seemed to affect enemy technology in ways that don't appear in anyone else's service record." Maria felt a familiar warmth in her chest. The coin Elena had given her was hidden in a secure location, but she could still sense its presence somehow, as if it had created a permanent connection between her and the abilities she'd discovered. "Sir, combat situations involve many variables. Sometimes luck and training combine in unexpected ways." Major Williams exchanged glances with the other officers. "We've also received inquiries from several government agencies that don't usually involve themselves in military personnel matters. Agencies that deal with classified research and unusual phenomena. They seem very interested in meeting with you." "What kind of agencies?" Maria asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The kind that don't officially exist," Colonel Morrison said dryly. "Which puts us in an interesting position. We have a decorated officer with an exemplary service record, but we also have indicators that suggest involvement in classified operations that weren't authorized through normal channels." Maria realized this moment had been inevitable from the moment she'd used her abilities in front of the organization's operatives. Too many people had seen too much for the incident to be completely covered up. The question was whether the people questioning her were legitimate military personnel or organization assets operating within the government structure. Sir, may I ask what you're recommending for my future assignment? Colonel Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That depends on your answers to some additional questions. Questions that will be asked by people with higher security clearances than anyone in this room. Before Maria could respond, the door opened and a woman in a civilian suit entered. She was carrying a briefcase and moved with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Gentlemen, the woman said without preamble, I need to speak with Captain Santos privately. This meeting is now classified at a level that requires your immediate departure from this room. The military officers gathered their files and left without argument, which told Maria everything she needed to know about this woman's authority within whatever organization she represented. My name is Director Lisa Chun, the woman said once they were alone. I work for a department that officially doesn't exist, investigating phenomena that officially don't happen. And you, Captain Santos, have become a person of significant interest to several different groups. Maria remained silent, waiting to learn which side this woman represented. The incident 3 weeks ago resulted in the destruction of a facility that we've been trying to locate for over 2 years. Satellite imagery shows energy signatures consistent with abilities that our science teams insist are theoretically impossible. And yet, here you are, apparently unharmed after being in the middle of whatever happened there. Director Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out several photographs. They showed the destroyed compound from multiple angles, with areas of destruction that clearly couldn't have been caused by conventional weapons. We know an organization has been operating outside governmental oversight, targeting individuals with unusual capabilities. We've been trying to infiltrate their operations for years without success. But you managed to destroy one of their facilities and rescue American military personnel in the process. I was rescued along with my soldiers, Maria said carefully. I don't have detailed knowledge of who was responsible for the rescue operation. Captain Santos, Director Chun said with a slight smile, we both know that's not entirely accurate. But I'm not here to interrogate you about classified operations. I'm here to offer you a choice. She pulled out another set of documents. Option 1. You accept a medical discharge due to combat stress, receive full benefits, and disappear into civilian life. We'll ensure your privacy and safety, but you'll never be allowed to serve in any official capacity again. And option 2. You join my department. We're tasked with investigating and protecting individuals like yourself, countering the organization that killed your parents, and developing capabilities to defend against threats that conventional military forces can't handle. The mention of her parents confirmed that Director Chen knew far more than she was revealing. How do you know about my parents? Because the same people who've been hunting you have been on our radar for over a decade. We know about the orphanage fire, the missing records, the series of foster families that never seemed to work out. We know you've been unconsciously using abilities that most people would consider impossible. Director Chen leaned back in her chair. We also know you've made contact with Elena Vasquez, Marcus Chun, no relation despite the name, and Sarah Kim, all of whom are wanted by the organization for crimes against their personnel and operations. Maria felt her abilities responding to the stress, heat building in her chest. Are you threatening them? Quite the opposite. We're offering them the same choice we're offering you. The chance to come in from the cold, work within official channels, and use their abilities to protect others instead of just running and hiding. Why should I trust you? How do I know you're not part of the organization that's been hunting people like me? Director Chen reached into her jacket and pulled out something that made Maria's breath catch. It was another coin, identical to the one Elena had given her, but this one was glowing more brightly and felt warm even across the distance of the table. Because your parents worked for us, Director Chen said simply, before they discovered the organization's infiltration of our department, before they were killed trying to expose the corruption, before you were hidden away for your own protection. The room seemed to spin around Maria as suppressed memories began flooding back. Images of the man and woman from her dreams, but Now she could see they were wearing uniforms similar to what Director Chen wore. Conversations in that mysterious language that she now realized was some kind of operational code. Training sessions that she'd thought were games but now recognized as preparation for the abilities she'd inherited. They were agents. They were heroes, Director Chen said firmly. And they died hoping their daughter would someday be able to finish what they started. The question is, are you ready to learn the truth about what that means? Maria thought about Elena, Marcus, and Sarah still hiding in their mountain stronghold. She thought about Rodriguez, Peterson, Johnson, and Williams returned to normal duty, but forever changed by their brief exposure to a world beyond normal understanding. She thought about the children she'd seen in the cavern, growing up in fear because people like them had no safe place in the world. What exactly does your department do? We investigate unusual phenomena, protect individuals with extraordinary abilities, and counter threats from organizations that would exploit or eliminate such people. We operate within the government structure, but with resources and authority that come directly from the highest levels of national security. Director Chen pulled out one final document. This is a contract that would make you a federal agent with a security clearance higher than most generals. Your official cover would be as a military liaison, but your real work would be coordinating with people like Elena and her team to take down the organization that killed your parents. Maria picked up the contract and scanned its contents. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Authority to operate across national boundaries, access to classified technologies, and, most importantly, protection for anyone she worked with who possessed unusual abilities. There's one condition, Director Chen added. If you accept this position, you can never go back to being just Captain Maria Santos. You'll officially become Agent Isabella Fuego, and everything that entails. The name felt right in a way that Maria Santos never had, like putting on clothes that actually fit instead of a uniform that was always slightly wrong. What about my soldiers? The people who serve under me? They'll be given new assignments that keep them far from this kind of operation. They've seen enough to be at risk, but not enough to be useful to either side. The best way to protect them is to ensure they never encounter this world again. Maria stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see normal military personnel going about their daily routines, unaware that their world existed parallel to another reality where people could control fire and gravity, where children were kidnapped for their genetics, where wars were fought with abilities that defied physical laws. She thought about the coin in her pocket, still warm with energy that connected her to parents she'd never really known but was finally ready to understand. She thought about Elena's promise that her real war hadn't started yet. If I sign this, she said without turning around, what's the first mission? Find the organization's primary headquarters. According to our intelligence, they're planning something called the Integration Protocol within the next 6 months. If they succeed, people with abilities like yours will either be enslaved or exterminated on a global scale. Maria turned back to face Director Chen. And you think Elena's group can help with that? I think Elena's group has been the only real opposition the organization has faced in decades. Combined with official government resources and legal authority, they might actually have a chance of winning. Maria picked up the pen and signed a contract without hesitation. Captain Maria Santos had served her country well, but Agent Isabella Fuego had a war to fight. When do I start? Director Chen smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. You started 3 weeks ago when you chose to save your soldiers instead of protecting your secret. Everything since then has just been paperwork. She handed Maria a new identification card and a communication device that looked similar to the ones Marcus had given her team. Welcome to the Department of Extraordinary Affairs, Agent Fuego. Your first assignment is to re-establish contact with your new teammates and begin planning the liberation of approximately 300 children currently being held in organization facilities worldwide. Isabella looked at her new credentials, then at the communication device that would reconnect her with Elena, Marcus, and Sarah. For the first time in her life, she had an official identity that matched who she really was, and a mission that used her abilities for something larger than personal survival. The coin in her pocket pulsed once with warm light, as if her parents were acknowledging that their daughter had finally found her way home. The war was just beginning, but now she wasn't fighting it alone. Outside the window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Isabella could feel electricity in the air that had nothing to do with weather. The organization would learn soon enough that they'd made a critical error when they tried to capture Captain Maria Santos. They'd awakened Agent Isabella Fuego instead, and she was done hiding.